What's the X factor for them this year? We talked about that could be a dark horse. Is it going to be that starting rotation, or is it going to be Brandon Phillips, or what do you think?
Well, dark horse. I mean, that's a great question. I think it's a two-part answer really. If you look at the Reds rotation, first of all, Aaron Harang had a terrible year last year, and if he can get back to his ace form, you got to have a horse at the top of your lineup, and you know what you're going to get for the most part out of like Bronson Arroyo. He's about a 12-game winner historically, something like that. You know what you're going to get out of him. But if Harang can get back to that form, you've got a couple young electric arms in Johnny Cueto and Edinson Volquez, who was an all-star last year. And I think that's going to be a key point. But if those guys pitch great and they can't score runs, then the Reds aren't going to win this year. Then they're going to probably finish at the bottom of the division. So I guess it's a two-part thing. You've got to get the top of the rotation pitching well and consistent, and then you've got to get the middle of the lineup scoring runs. And an X factor, I guess if I had to pick one player offensively, and this isn't somebody that a lot of people wouldn't be thinking of, and it's not a Votto or Bruce, Ramon Hernandez he's not known for his offense, but the Reds the last few years, they've had guys like Paul Bacco, Javier Valentin, David Ross at the catcher position. If they get any offense at all out of this Ramon Hernandez from Baltimore in that Ryan Friel trade, if they can get any offense out of him, that's a big bonus that the Reds haven't had in a few years.
So basically what you're saying is that if the Reds score more runs than their opponents, they're going to do pretty well?
Well, of course. If they score more runs than their opponents, they'll win. But the problem is the Reds used to score a ton of runs, but their pitching was terrible. And that's the problem, is that they may put up 4, 5, 6 runs, but they give up 8 or 9, and you're not going to win that way either.
I'll tell you what, in my opinion here, this is a big-time key for this team. I think Encarnacion needs to fulfill that promise, because if he gets hot in April and maybe halfway through May, I think at that point they can bump Phillips into the 2-hole, and they can go Phillips, Votto, Encarnacion, and Bruce. You know what? That gets Phillips another 50 at-bats a year, and so on and so forth. I really think that would be huge. You can get more production at the top of the order, because I don't think Hairston's a number 2 hitter. I just think he's there because they don't have anybody else. I love Phillips as a number 2 hitter, in my opinion.
I think that's a great point, and that's something I hadn't even thought of, because last year Encarnacion did lead the team in home runs. Now that's not a very telling statistic because he only hit 28. But the thing with Encarnacion is if he can get hot and start playing better defense too, maybe because I think a lot of it with him is mental. If he goes out and he gets an error, I think that sticks with him when he comes up to the plate even next time up. But if he can get hot, that is a really good point, because I think he could definitely be an X factor.
Talk to us about Homer Bailey, Mike. We know he's been down with the Louisville Bats for quite a while and has had a couple of stints up and down. Is he going to finally get up and stay up in the majors this year?
Homer Bailey, I mean, that's another good guy to bring up. The Reds organization and the Reds fan base as a whole, being down here in Louisville and a lot of Reds fans around here, and then I try to go up and see the Reds as many times during the season as I can. A lot of the Reds fan base is really down on this kid. I mean, but you got to remember, he's only 22 years old, and 21, 20. I mean, he's young. He's just a little bit older than I am. But the thing about him is he's got electric stuff. He throws the ball really hard, but he's just inconsistent. I mean, he hangs the ball over the plate too much, and he can get shelled on an outing. Last year, he was like 0-6 last year, or something like that, with like a 9 ERA. That's not going to get it done at the majors, obviously. So here's what I predict with him. I think Micah Owings is going to get that 5th spot, and then I think that Homer Bailey may start the season. And this is going to be a big decision for Walt Jocketty. Speaking of Jocketty, I kind of want to get your take on what you think he'll do, just based off what he did in St. Louis. But they're thinking about bringing him out of the bullpen as a long reliever. And I'm fine with that because he's got good stuff, but I'm worried about that affecting his development. And that's the one thing that I think a lot of Reds fans are. But Homer Bailey, he will eventually he will be a big league pitcher one day. I just don't know if it'll be with the Reds.
I had a question on Homer Bailey, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if I'm not mistaken, he usually tended to get rocked around the 3rd or 4th inning, and that's the second. Yeah, that's right. Is that right?
Yeah, that's about right. I mean, he would come out, and he normally have a promising 1st or 2nd inning, and then he would just get into a lot of trouble. And talk about a mental guy. He goes out there, and I think this is important as a pitcher. He goes out there very confident in his stuff, and then he starts getting shelled, and he gets down on himself, and then he just starts serving the ball up. So, yeah, he normally started having troubles in about the third or fourth inning.
Well, see, then in my opinion, he's perfect to be a setup guy. You only go through the lineup once, seventh and eighth inning, somewhere in there. He can get you out of jams with the fireball. He really throws a good heater. I like the idea that, you know what, when Wainwright when Wainwright first came up, he was a setup man. I know he was the closer his rookie year, but it took him a while to gel in. Once Isringhausen blew it, let's try it that way with the Cardinals, he became the closer. I can see Homer Bailey doing that, setting up for Cordero and maybe throwing him in the seventh and eighth, and maybe that's his problem. Once somebody's seen him, he gets rocked a little bit.
Now, do you think that if they do that, do you think he could come back to being a starter, or do you think he could be just a lifelong bullpen major leaguer?
Wainwright's been pretty good since that.
Yeah.
But you know what? If you can find this mental kid somewhere where he succeeds, maybe you leave him in that spot for his career and you just say, look, we get as much as we can out of him. And, God, it's been 3 or 4 years of him being so hyped up. You just have to find a way for this guy to be successful.
Yeah, and I think that's a great idea. I mean, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, you know what? I want this kid up at the major league level because he has better stuff than a guy like Nick Massett, who would be coming out of the bullpen, the guy that the Reds got off the Griffey trade from the Chicago White Sox. I mean, he's a good long reliever, but as a fan, it's more exciting to see a guy like Homer Bailey come in and pitch in the 6th, 7th, and 8th, you know?
All right, Mike, we talked a lot about the division as a whole with Jim when he was on. Curtis and Jim, and I agree with this as well. I didn't say it, but we all kind of agree that the Cubs are definitely the team to beat. How do you see this whole division shaking out?
Well, I think the Cubs, just on sheer spending alone, because we all know that the Cubs they haven't produced come October. You know, they can't get off the schneid, if you will, in the playoffs. But I think that the Cubs definitely are the favorite to win the division, just on talent alone. So I would take them at 1. You know, I think the Cardinals they're gonna have a pretty good team this year. You can never doubt Tony La Russa. You know, I think that he does a lot sometimes with nothing. And you know, he's got some players like Ankiel, and of course you've got the best player in the National League, if not in all of baseball, in Albert Pujols. So the Cardinals are always going to be a threat there. And then here's what I think. I think the Reds, if they can put together a run, I think the Reds can finish as high as 3rd in the division. And I know that's a stretch, and not a lot of people are saying that, but I think they could finish ahead of the Brewers or the Cardinals, just depending on what kind of Cardinals team shows up this season. So that's the way. And then at the bottom, I think the Astros in 5th, and then I think at the bottom are the Pirates.
All right, Mike. Well, thank you for joining us. You can always check out Mike's articles on the Reds on the website. We haven't even said that today. It's bigleaguebaseballblog.blogspot.com. Curtis's articles on the Rays and the Cardinals this season. Alex Portelli writing about the Chicago White Sox. Jim Rosati writing about the Pirates. And Paul Varner writing about the Royals. I just kind of write about whatever I feel like. Thank you again for joining us, Mike, and I'm sure we'll talk to you very soon.
Yeah, I look forward to talking to you guys again. Thanks a lot.
All right, thanks, Mike.